every time I teach it. So we're going to transition into engines. So we're going to start here today on the 3rd, and we will be done with engines on the 18th of March, shortly after the Ides of March. All right?
Sounds so long.
Oh, trust me, it'll go by quickly. It usually does. Usually. Now this is a fun one because you're going to spend quite a bit of time in the lab. You're going to have that thing tore down completely and you're going to put it back. The only thing I wish we could do, we don't really have time and we can't do it because of regulations, is actually build a runner, have you guys fired off. I've been in classes where you put one together and you fire it up, and that's just a hoot once you get it going, you know.
That was always scary when it was a diesel engine, you didn't know it was gonna run away or not.
Yeah, that'd be it. Yeah, those old two-stroke Detroits that you goofed the tune-up up and you fired it off, it went to wide open throttle, and if you didn't get it shut down in time, you're gonna throw parts.
Scary as hell, I'll tell you.
It just and it just stays there. You get this.
Si grabas en Drive, no va tu memoria.
Sí.
Ya, Drive es diferente. Lo tienes que tener ahí. Sí.
Pero de todas maneras lo voy a poder poner en el YouTube. From Drive.
Yeah.
Ah, eso no sé, porque yo es la primera vez que lo voy a usar en Drive ahorita.
Okay.
Or
Ya
if
traté de
you
meter
do your
uno.
tune-ups and you've done them a while, you take the air intake off and you have a piece of plywood
Ahora voy a
handy, so
empezar a
if it
grabar
fires up,
mejor
it
de
just starts the plywood up. It still tries to chug though.
We are doing this one.
It's going around.
You had two?
No, it shouldn't. One says 7:30 and one says 2:30.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Good both.
oh, this is too
All right, just cross your name off of it.
Okay, let's do that differently.
So fortunately, we don't have that style engine anymore.
Actually, we have one.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. But that's electronic, so you didn't have to worry about a rack. But is that a? Oh no, you're right. That's mechanical. Yep, that'll still run away. All right. So today we're going to start the engine module, module 7, and we're just going to talk about basic engine theory today. It's funny because if you'd have taken this class back in 2005, 2006, we wouldn't be talking about spark plugs and coils. We'd still be talking about fuel injectors, nozzles, fuel injection pumps.
Back when I took it in 1985, we didn't even talk about Cummins.
No, you were all Detroit.
This whole place was Detroit back then.
I took it in 96 and I think it was still Detroit. Two-stroke. And even then, half unless they're talking about, these things are going to be going away pretty soon. Yeah, that million-mile motor.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, engine, million-mile engine. Frank will tell you the story on that. Hap Arnold was an instructor here, probably 15 years ago now. He had this story about a million-mile International Harvester diesel, and it was quite the tale. So it was an interesting story. But get back to what I was saying. You know, back in 05, 06, 07, when we were doing this class, gas motor, spark plug motor buses were just coming onto the property. We still had vastly, mostly diesel engines still powering the fleet. And I remember the mechanics in the class, I'll be retired before we go to spark plug engines and the emission controls and blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, that stuff rolled up on us quick. 06, 07, we had 199 natural gas buses landed on the property. Like, wow. So we slowly phased out diesel motors. And I honestly thought I wouldn't be teaching a class that didn't have diesel engines in it. So it was kind of interesting. So I've had to learn a little bit as well. So when we talk about engines, we'll talk about spark plug, intake, air, fuel, things needed to run this engine. So the class is going to be laid out something like that, scheduled there. Now, I try and keep to that as best I can, and most of the time I don't have to change it up too terribly much. But every now and then I'll have to swap a couple of days depending on availability, training aids, and whatnot. So on lab days, and I'll try and keep you informed as to when a lab day is, try and wear clothes that you don't mind if they get a little dirty. If you're driving that day, I got some lab coats I can loan you to wear so you don't get your uniform dirty prior to going on shift. Okay. Basically, the shoe wear you guys are wearing today is fine. If you have flip-flops or sandals, I can't let you in the lab. So, no steel-toe flip-flops, anything like that. So, your footwear like you have today looks to be pretty good. So this is our schedule. Like I said, engines, upper components, lab, lower component. There's some labs toward tension, so I'll try and keep you abreast as to when we're going to be doing labs. There's a lot of labs. What you're going to end up doing in the labs is you've probably seen those 2 red engines sitting in there. You're going to tear them down, and then we'll have reassemble them. By the time the class is over in March, they should look very much like they look right now. Okay?
Should.
Well, should. You never know when things. I don't think I've had a class where we haven't gotten them all back together. I think the 15 years I've been doing this, we've gotten them all back together. So, what we'll talk about today, handouts are behind you. Your new books are back there in the cardboard box. We'll talk about engines, operations, the theory of operation, how the engine works. We'll talk about energy, power, torque, some terms you might not have heard, like volumetric efficiency, thermal efficiency, displacement, compression ratios, these sort of things. We're not going to get bogged down in math on, figuring displacements and all that. But I want to at least let you know where the numbers come from, what they mean. Okay? So, somebody tell me, what is an engine? What does it do? It's a pump. What kind of pump?
Heat pump.
Heat pump. Pretty much it. Energy converter, heat pump. Any mechanism or machine designed to convert heat energy into mechanical energy. Okay? So it's all about heat. Where's the heat come from?
Combustion.
That's the release of the heat. Where does the heat come from?
The fuel.
The fuel. The fuel. Fuel will contain heat. We have to release the heat. And we release the heat from the fuel in the process of combustion. And then depending on how much heat we have in the fuel will determine how much pressure is generated in the compression in the cylinders and how much force is applied to the top of the piston to push the piston down. There's many things we can do to aid in that, and we'll talk about that throughout this whole module. Okay? But yeah, you're right, it's a heat pump, heat converter. Now think about this for a minute. So we take the heat value of the fuel. Through the process of combustion, we change into rapidly expanding gases on top of the piston. We force the piston down, which now changes the heat energy into mechanical energy, and we move the bus, right, through transmission, drivetrain, and so forth. Now, you remember a few modules back we talked about brakes? We put the brakes on, and through the mechanism of friction, we take the mechanical energy and convert it back into heat energy. So you see the energy's never been destroyed. It never goes away. It just changes from one form to another and then back again. Pretty cool. Okay. So, give you a better understanding of basic engine theory, some combustion, some emissions. We'll do a little laptop work towards the end of the module. Troubleshooting. Now it's important that when we're in the lab, there's somewhat lecturing going on as well as there. So if you want to take notes while we're in there, that's absolutely fine too. But I'd rather you participate in the assembly of this assembly and get your hands on this thing. Because being mechanics, we're more tactile learners than we are, lecturing learners, most of us. Okay. So, like I said, talk about design, better understanding of the engine. And I'll base it mostly off what we currently run, and most of the fleets in here run that Cummins ISLG. There's no other game in town at the moment. I don't see another engine company building natural gas motors for transit because there's no money in it. So I don't know if Cummins is getting federal money to do this or not. They're certainly not making any money off of these natural gas motors. Cummins is big enough. Natural gas motors to Cummins is about 1% of their product line. And they've got all kinds of other, and they're venturing into electric now as well. So ought to be interesting in the next 15 years to see what comes out.
They don't supply for the engines for all of the buses,
Cummins does.
like for every other agencies.
Oh yeah. MTA, Riverside, Omni, Foothill, they're all running Cummins.
And all of that is just 1% other.
Yeah. Cummins is a huge, huge global manufacturer. They make diesel engines. They're expanding in other product line. Like I say, they're seeing the writing on the wall when it comes to internal combustion engines, and so they're getting into electric, electric motive drives. They've got a conglomeration with PACCAR for an all-electric Class 8 truck. It's actually out there doing miles right now, and it's doing pretty well. It's running up against Tesla. Tesla's electric truck, you have to buy Tesla's trailer because that's where they store the batteries, or at least that's what I heard. With Cummins, this Cummins vehicle, you can buy the truck and run whatever trailer you want. So, be interesting to see how it plays out. It might go from Cummins Engine Company to Cummins Motor Company. You never know. You never know. Hopefully I'll be retired and I can just read about it in the papers. We'll be out here turning wrenches on that stuff, man. I'll let you younger folks do that. All right. Now, an engine turns heat energy into useful mechanical energy based on thermodynamics. So how do we do this? Well, obviously we have to have a fuel, and today it's mostly carbon. Okay. We have to have some oxygen, and we have to have a heat source to light it off. Okay, or an ignition source to light it off. And the engine as a whole is not very efficient as far as the heat it makes versus the heat it uses. I think today's engines are about 40% efficient. So that means they waste about 60% of the heat that's generated. That's why we have a cooling system and an exhaust. In addition to getting rid of the byproducts of combustion, it also carries out a fair amount of heat. Okay? So it wastes several compounds. Our bodies are heat engines through the mechanism of metabolism. We take in food and oxygen. External work is done. Some work more than others. Laying on the couch is work. You got to breathe. Right? And we breathe out carbon dioxide, which up until recently was considered a harmless gas. Carbon dioxide is actually what the plants use to convert back into oxygen. And we have green plants. It's also what makes your soda bubbly. Carbon dioxide. Now, if you talk to others, it's, oh, it's a greenhouse gas. Whatever. Now, unfortunately, today's engine designs are not driven by performance. What are they driven by? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Emissions. Followed closely by, in second place, fuel consumption. Fuel mileage. Now, that doesn't mean to say that some positives haven't come out of that. Okay? To make an engine more or less polluting, they've had to make it more efficient, and along with that comes performance improvements. But that wasn't the driving factor. It was all about what's coming out of the tailpipe. Automotive field got drug into this long before Class 8 trucks did, long before transit did. Automotive got drugged down the exhaust emissions trail back in the 70s when you started seeing smog pumps. Who remembers those smog pumps? Okay, And then came catalytic converters, or if you're from the South, Cadillac converter. My Cadillac converter broke. Yep, still a Chevy. Okay. Then they went with port fuel injection. Well, actually, throttle body fuel injection. Then they went with port fuel injection. Then they went with sequential port fuel injection. Then they came up with variable valve timing. Now they've got variable combustion engines. This is all not about performance. It's all about emissions. However, the performance of the engine did improve, but that wasn't the motivating factor.
So now we have gasoline direct injection.
Yeah. You've had diesel direct injection since the 30s.
Yep.
Detroit. Volkswagen has a commercial TDI, turbo direct injection. Ooh, nothing new. It's new in automotive. It's not new with diesel. So, one of the driving factors behind running these gas motors isn't because they're any better, because quite honestly, they're not. They're worse. The horsepower to weight ratio isn't there. The fuel we're using is absolutely the worst possible fuel you could use to run an engine because it has a very low heat value. The only reason we're forced to run it is what comes out of the tailpipe. Anybody know what the major item coming out of the tailpipe of a natural gas engine is? Formaldehyde. Are there any long-term studies to human exposure to formaldehyde? You're it. But the measurable gases that the state of California considers emissions, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, partially burnt hydrocarbons, and NOx, it's clean. It's clean. Okay. You all know it's clean because when you pull the oil out of the crankcase after 6,000 miles, it almost looks like the day you put it in. Almost. Okay. So this is the motivating factor behind those engines. However, if you look at today's Tier 5 compliant diesels, they're cleaner. Much cleaner. And on an operation per mile cost, much cheaper. But because the politics of the state doesn't like the word diesel, we're stuck with this. Stuck with it. Cummins makes some engines that the air coming into it, when it leaves, it's actually cleaner. But because of politics and Mary Nichols in charge of AQ&D, who by the way used 3 individuals in her department with forged credentials from college to say that diesel is bad, that's why we're stuck with it. Lying politician. They did a big old expose on it. She said, we don't care. So there you go. Their leading scientist with all his college degrees, he only graduated high school. The rest of it was a lie. But here we are. You could thank Edmund Brown, Jerry Brown's father, for her. He started that whole crap.
But even if they decided to go back to diesel, it would be more expensive because you have to change the pumps and all stuff, right?
Well, yeah, we would, sure. We would. We'd have to put the tanks back in the ground and go back to the way it was 10 years ago. But if you just look at it engine versus engine, they're better engines. They make more power. They're more efficient as far as miles per gallon. And they're cleaner.
They last longer.
They last longer.
Because they run more off of torque, right? Than,
Well, they generate less heat. The heat that they do generate, they use more of it.
and less RPMs. They run.
No, they're about the same RPM range as what we're running.
The gas motor.
Yeah. Yeah. But horsepower and torque are better. You know, more reliable. We're not blowing pistons up at 60,000 miles. Less heat, so more longevity. Diesel exhaust is only about 700 degrees. Natural gas is up about 1,300. So that heat wears. And then, of course, you're stuck with after treatments. Natural gas emissions control systems, they've done about all they can do to clean up the engine. Okay? Now, to meet further tightening emission standards, we've had to treat the exhaust outside of the motor. Catalytic converters. EGR valves, we'll talk about all this.
okay? Diesel particulate traps. And I'm all about clean air, I'm good with that. But it's getting a little technical with how we get the tailpipe clean enough to match the standards. Of course, with Trump, maybe we won't have to worry about it, kind of backing off of some of those. I'm not too keen on that, but on the odd side of this, the fact that the standards are getting so tight and the costs are getting so high to run an internal combustion engine, it's driving the electrics. It's making people look at electric drives and considering them because on a cost comparison, they're starting to become equivalent. But the big problem that most people don't want to deal with is, what are you going to do with all those batteries when they die? Is that not going to be an environmental hazard? So all the environmentalists are, oh, go electric! You want to get Phil all worked up. Tell him you're not saving any emissions by driving your Leaf. You're just moving them somewhere else. Chris is going to debate me on that as well. Right?
Hmm?
Phil's like, I'm going green. No, you're not. You're just moving the emissions somewhere else.
Well, yeah, it takes fossil fuels.
It takes more power to charge your battery.
Yeah.
And not only that, all the green carbon you saved with that plug-in, you lose when they got to destroy the batteries. What are they going to do with them? Where are you going to put them?
There's also
It's
ways
just-
to produce making the batteries.
Yeah.
Put them where they put all the tires.
With Jimmy Hoffa?
And the mining and using the tires. The mining.
Springfield tire fires?
The earth.
Yeah. So there, I mean, I guess it's how far you want to look up the trail. Yeah, that's great. You're not buying gasoline. You're not consuming carbon fuel, and you have nothing come out of the tailpipe of your car. Swell. But like you said, the lithium-ion batteries had to get mined somewhere. The additional electricity to charge your car had to come from somewhere, so some coal-fired plant had to make a little more energy to charge your grid. And our aging grid, if we went 100% electric now, the grid couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
I mean, these are just thoughts. It's all how far you want to look down the line, I guess. If it makes you feel good to be driving a Leaf, that's fine. Have at it. I would love to have one, actually, because then I wouldn't have to stop at the gas station. It's cheaper out of my pocket. Oh, Hummer's got an all-electric coming out next year. H3 electric. Olive drab for me, thank you. But I'm not saying I'm not saying I'm against electric. If you live next to a freeway and we went to all electric tomorrow, oh, your day just got quieter,
Yeah.
right?
But in most cases, it's probably better to have the emissions outside of a highly dense place and move those coal fires out to a more rural area where it's effective.
Yeah, but then you have to mine more coal to run the power plant, so you scar up here somewhere else. I mean, there's two sides to that coin. There's
You're
right.
just moving the source of emission.
I'm sorry?
You're just moving
Yeah.
the source of the emission.
Yeah. So Tennessee gets polluted and we don't. That's great. All depends on your feeling on people from the south, I suppose.
Hey, what about because diesels, they can run off cooking oil and burn completely clean, you know?
Well, they can, but their horsepower and torque drop considerably.
Yeah, you have to use a lot more of it.
We ran one at LA Unified. We had this Mercedes motor we ran on French fry oil, used French fry oil. The cafeteria loved it. Because when we ran that thing, it smelled like French fries, and everybody on campus got the munchies. And then you talk about lunchtime, because it was the cafeteria was contract out. It was private vendor. He loved it. Hey, you got to run that more often, man. My sales went through the roof. A kickback here, maybe. Make a little donation to the department. So, basic principles. We're going to talk mostly about four-stroke. Two-stroke diesel is not in the game anymore. Two-stroke hasn't been in the game since the mid-90s. Okay? I think Detroit rolled their last two-stroke off somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s. We'll talk about horsepower and torque and the relationship between that. Okay? So to get what we need to get out of this thing, out of this heat pump, we need air, or more precisely, we need oxygen. But what is the air made of that we breathe? You might know.
Oxygen, nitrogen.
Well, I don't know. I don't think hydrogen. It's oxygen,
Nitrogen.
78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% other noble gases. Gases from England. Come on. It's like, I can't remember what a noble gas is. I was asleep at that part of science class.
It's standalone. Oxygen is a noble gas. Oh, it doesn't need another molecule attached to it.
O2? Yeah, there's other noble gases in addition to oxygen.
O2 is not a noble gas because it's O2 and not just O.
Yeah. O2 is fine. O3 will kill you. O3 is the upper stratosphere. It's the ozone layer. You don't want to breathe ozone. You won't live. The fuel, also we need carbon. Okay. And we need an ignition source. Okay. So it takes about 20 pounds of air to burn 1 pound of fuel. I don't know where that number came from, but it sounds about right. Anybody know what 20 pounds of air looks like? How big is it? What kind of box are you talking about? It's a lot. It's a lot of air. Considering diesel fuel is 7.2 pounds per gallon, so we'd need 140 point something pounds of air to burn 1 gallon of diesel fuel. I can't even fathom what 140 pounds of air would look like. It's a lot of air. It's a lot of air. Okay. So fuel is the chemical that mixes with the air, fuel-air ratio. Okay. And the ignition source to light this mixture off, in our case, comes from a spark plug. Used to be, when you talked about diesel, the technical name for diesel engine was combustion ignition. Diesel comes from the guy that invented it, Rudolf Diesel. Okay. Anybody know where the first commercial diesel engine was put into service? Who bought it and used it? Anheuser-Busch. They made beer.
What?
They bought. It ran on coal dust. So it's pretty rudimentary, but it proved the principle. Combustion ignition means I compress the air in the cylinder to a point where it gets so hot that when I introduce a volatile liquid like diesel fuel, it ignites and expands. Okay? That's a combustion ignition engine or a diesel engine. Okay? Usually a diesel engine is made of heavier components, more robust components because of the pressures involved in running the engine. Okay. Diesel engines, by and large, make more efficient use of the fuel. Okay. And they tend to last longer because they're built more robust because of the fuel. So, for instance, you have a Dodge Cummins. Okay. You can expect to get 3, 4, 4.5, 450,000 miles out of that motor by its design.
Notice he didn't say the truck, he said the motor.
Well, the truck's fine. It has its problems. They've upgraded the transmission. They went to a German transmission behind it. When that truck first came out with a diesel, the weak link in it was the transmission. A friend of mine, Don Sullivan, he taught over at Long Beach City. I did my internship with him. He had one of the first iterations of that Dodge truck, and he pulled his horse trailers with it. He was complaining he might as well put the transmission in with Velcro because he was changing it so often. That first iteration basically had a gasoline engine tranny behind it. It just couldn't handle the torque and horsepower generated by that Cummins. Okay.
Sorry, couldn't resist, I'm not Dodge fan.
The second generation of that engine, the 24 valve with the mechanical fuel pump, is rated by RV Magazine as the best fifth wheel pulling vehicle out there. If you get a Dodge truck and get rid of the trash transmission, put an Allison behind it, that comes with a 6-speed, pull all night long. I had a 5.9 in my Winnebago, 36-foot Winnebago. We were coming home from Idaho. The Cummins and the Allison in an MH2500. And we were going down the freeway. 2 gas motorhomes looked like turtles on the beach trying to pass. So I got in the passing lane and went by and looked down, and my speedo was at 6 o'clock. It was past 85 miles an hour. Cummins pushing me along. I went by the gas boys and they were, oh my God. Okay. So in our ISLGs out there, we use a spark plug to light off our mixture. Now, what is it about the spark plug that sets off my fuel air mixture? Is it a spark? It's the heat generated by the electrons jumping an air gap. Now, Phil told you back in module, I don't know, 5, okay, the electronics part, that in order for current to flow, you had to have a complete path back to ground, did he not? There's one exception to that. Spark plugs. Now, what happens when electricity encounters resistance? What do we generate? Heat, right? Some heat's going to be natural in a circuit. But when I take electrons and I force them to do something they don't like to do, like jump air, is air a conductor or an insulator? For the most part, it's an insulator. When I force electrons to jump that gap, in the process of doing that, they generate a lot of heat. Anybody have an idea how much heat is at the tip of a spark plug when I'm firing it?
30,000 degrees.
Yeah, because that's what it says, isn't it?
Good guess.
Good guess. I like this case. All right, you read it. 30,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, anybody have any idea how much voltage I need? What is voltage? Anybody want to go in the Wayback Machine and try to remember what Phil said voltage was?
Speed. Electromagnetic force that pushes the
Pressure.
EMF.
You said it pushes. You're right, EMF, electromagnetic. It's the pressure behind the electron current flow. So how much pressure do I need to force that electron across that air gap? In voltage-wise? About 30K. About 30K. Okay. Now, so I'm going to put fuel and air into a cylinder in a proportionate ratio, air-fuel ratio. And I'm going to introduce some heat, spark plug. And I'm going to light that bad bear off. Okay, now, when we talk about emissions, which will be a prevailing theme through this whole module, there's one number we don't want to get to. We don't want the peak temperature in my combustion chamber to reach 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Why?
Get a
What
hole
am I-
in the top of your cylinder.
Huh?
You'll get a hole in the top of your cylinder.
No, not at all.
NOx.
Not at all. Emissions, smog.
It's
When
NOx.
I pressurize and I heat the nitrogen part of my mixture, and then I introduce it to sunlight, we get beautiful smog. Now, I don't know how many native Californians I have here that were in the state back in the 60s and 70s, but you used to listen to the George Putnam News on Channel 5 in the morning, and they'd tell you you're going to have a stage 1 smog alert. Now, basically what that means, if we had a stage 1 smog alert today, you wouldn't be able to see the mountains over there. A nice brownish haze. How many of you guys come down off the Grapevine? You see that little... Okay, that is smog. You come down into LAX, that is smog. See that little brown layer you fly into? Yeah. That's smog. Oxides of nitrogen interacting with sunlight. Okay, so we do several things to lower that temperature. EGR. Exhaust gas recirculation. We'll talk about that.
Make it run dirtier so you can make it run cleaner.
What's that?
Make it run dirtier so you can make it run cleaner.
You make it run less efficient
Yeah.
so you could make it run cleaner. No, the smog devices are not performance enhancement equipment. In fact, you know, you see the Dodge guys now bringing up Dodge. Oh, they upgraded the 5.9 to 6.7 so we get more power. No, they upgraded the 5.9 to 6.7 liters to offset the power loss due to emissions. They didn't do it because they wanted to. They did it because they had to. Not that 6.7 has, I don't know if it has much more power or not, to be honest with you. But the 5.9 in its iterations would make 300 horsepower, no problem. In fact, that family group, depending on what you put it in, could make 350 horsepower. But it wouldn't be able to pass smog. So to maintain the power output of that engine at the level that you like, you wouldn't want to get your Dodge 3500 that you just paid $90,000 for with a Cummins that made 155 horsepower. The hell are you going to pull with that? You couldn't even catch a cold with it. right? So if I'm gonna pay $90,000 for a truck, it better make power. And so Dodge is like, well, we're gonna have to jack it up a little. And that's what they did. Sure, they sell it on TV, more power. Maybe a little. But that wasn't why they made it a 6.7. Because they couldn't get any more power out of the Cummins. In fact, they were losing power to meet smog. So I'm not gonna, if I had a used truck over here that made 300 horse and I had a new one over here at 300, at $90,000 and only made 225 horse, why the hell would I do that? From a marketing point of view, pay more, get less? That makes sense. Now, so like I said, fuel is a mixture of hydrocarbons, hydrogen, carbon. Air is a mixture of nitrogen, oxygen. And the chemical reaction when we combust the mixture. We'll talk more about that chemical reaction and its result when we get into emissions and combustion. So when hydrogen combines with oxygen, we get water. You ever see the old guy got his car idling in the garage warming up in the morning, you see the water pouring out the tailpipe? That's because the engine's cold and the chemical reaction is inefficient in the combustion chamber. So you have leftover hydrogen and leftover oxygen in the mixture, and when it combines, it makes water. Okay? That's why you see these tractor trailers with drain plugs on their stacks. They want to go up behind the cab because they want to drain the water out of it, because when that engine first fires up in the morning, starts to warm up, it'll make a lot of water. Start rusting out things. Now, carbon and oxygen combined will make carbon dioxide. Now when you go to the smog station, where everybody loves going to get their car smogged, they look at how efficient the engine's working based on what the emissions are coming out of the tailpipe. And if my carbon monoxide percentages are too high, my engine's not running really efficient. If my carbon dioxide percentages are too low, my engine's not running efficient. So the more incomplete combustion we have, the higher our carbon monoxide emission level. Carbon monoxide is what kills you. You ever watch the old movies, the guy goes out to his Packard with the vacuum cleaner hose on the tailpipe, sticks it in the car, rolls the window up, fires it up, and next thing you know, Perry Mason finds him 3 hours later and he's dead? That's because the carbon monoxide killed him. Okay? Today, if you were to do that, because the engines are so efficient, you better bring a lunch and a sleeping bag. You're going to be in there a while. You'll probably die from heat prostration as opposed to carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, this is just for training. Don't anybody go out and try it. Training said, well, actually, if you're that feeble-minded, maybe if you leave the planet, it'll be better, right? I actually got in trouble for that one in LA Enterprise. So this is what they're looking at when they do it, when they stick the sniffer in the tailpipe on your car. They're looking at these various levels. Now, we use a theory of thermodynamics. Thermal refers to heat, dynamics refers to mechanical energy. Like I said earlier, we take our fuel-air mixture, chemical, we throw some heat in it, it combusts. Combustion process rapidly releases the heat from the fuel, and that rapid release of heat puts pressure on top of the piston. This is why diesel engines are more torquey, more horsepower per cubic inch than gas. Diesel fuel has a higher heat value than gasoline. So when I ignite the diesel fuel, it produces more pressure on top of the piston than a gasoline motor does. Hence, you get more torque out of a diesel motor than you would a gasoline motor. I'm not bragging on gas motors, they're fine.
So you're saying if you make a performance car, it will be faster in diesel than a regular car?
Could very well be. Could very well be.
More heat.
No, the engine makes more efficient use of the heat in the fuel. In fact, in the 50s, a gentleman who didn't graduate 8th grade, whose teacher said he wouldn't amount to nothing, his name was Chelsea Cummins. You've heard of him, he's the same guy. He built a diesel race car for the Indianapolis 500 in the early 50s. And he was kicking their ass. He was ahead by 2 laps. He broke some $5 part and couldn't finish the race. And the gas guys are like, that's not fair. We can't compete. So they made an air inlet restriction that said the engine cannot draw more than this amount of air per stroke. Well, you can't put an air inlet restriction on a diesel engine. It won't run. And that's exactly why they did it, because the gas guys, who had all the money, by the way, were complaining. You know, the little car companies like Ford, Chevrolet, General Motors. We can't run against this Chelsea Cummins. It's too fast. You have to do something. So they did. He drove a truck cross country. It was a world record for the amount of fuel used. He used very little fuel because to prove the efficiency of his engine. Now, if you watch Can-Am, auto race 24 hours a day, Le Mans, Audi's running a diesel. He's kicking ass. So diesel's got a bad rap, and then it's this big, large, lumbering, smoking engine. You know, the old 75 Freightliner going up the grapevine. Okay, that black smoke you see coming out of the tailpipe, it's not smoke. It's very fine particulates of carbon because it wasn't making efficient use of the combustion process. But now they tell us 20 years later it's a carcinogen. Gee, great, thanks a lot, appreciate that. Okay. Now if you see one of those tractor trailers going up the grapevine, all you see coming out of that tailpipe is heat. You see the little heat signals, little wave. If you look on the exhaust pipe, you don't see nothing. That's how efficient the engines are. In fact, the emissions have gotten so good on those engines that some of the elements they look at, like it's oxygen rich when it comes out. It's actually, I won't say better for the environment, but there's not a lot of emissions coming out of that engine because they've worked so hard to improve its efficiency in the use of that fuel, and they've cleaned the fuel up. Back in the 80s and 90s, that fuel was heavy with sulfur. And so the government, and I'm not a big fan by the government by any stretch.
You like Trump.
Okay, break time, except for you. The government, in their drive to meet emission standards, they actually took an intelligent first step and they said, well, let's look at what's burning first, and they demanded low sulfur fuel. And of course, the oil companies were like, well, no, that'll cost too much. It might, oh my God, it might run diesel to $2 a gallon. Holy shit. And so they said to the state of California, which first mandated low sulfur fuel, well, we just won't import fuel into the state. California's like, fine, don't. Well, guess where they make all their money? California. We got the 2 largest ports on the planet. So, yeah, don't sell your fuel here. We'll get it somewhere else. And so Mobil and Shell and all those said, well, BP, British Petroleum, well, okay, we'll do it. And diesel didn't hit $2 a gallon. This was back in the 90s when diesel fuel was about 45 cents a gallon, something like that. It was cheap. And it still was even after they removed the sulfur out of it.
Yeah, but then by them doing that, they removed some of the lubricity out of the fuel too.
Somewhat, but not. They just changed the metallurgy of injectors. It wasn't a big thing. They had the technology. Now, the ratio of the work done by the engine, and this is kind of an older spec, but it's somewhat valid. 1/3 of it's used to expand on top of the piston, push the piston down, and actually make torque. 1/3 of it's lost in the cooling system, and 1/3 of it's carried out by the tailpipe. Okay? That's pretty much how the engine uses heat. I think the most efficient, thermally efficient engine is somewhere upwards of 45 to 50%. It's still experimental, as far as I know. Okay? So they rate the heat value in terms of British thermal units, or British thermal unit if you happen to be a lining, and I can say that because I'm 50% lining. Okay? It's a measurement of the amount of heat energy required to raise the temperature of 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit at barometric pressure here at sea level. Okay? So a gallon of diesel, 1 pound, 1 gallon, 144,000 BTUs per gallon. Gasoline's about 135,000, and then you see your wonderful British thermal units of a gallon of natural gas, about 75,000. I've seen it as low as 55,000 produced thermal units. Almost half that of diesel. So just looking at heat values, that doesn't make any sense at all. Using a fuel that's half that of diesel. But, and these days, the diesels are as clean or cleaner than natural gas. But because of the political environment and the fact that some people who know nothing about mechanics decided diesel bad. Well, I'm sure they're getting some money kickback from somewhere. I don't have a high. I don't think much of politicians.
Diesel's cleaner in part, it's due to the after treatment systems too.
Yeah, well, yeah. And the designs of the engines have gotten much better. See, because back in the day, there were no requirements on diesel. While automotive was going through the growing pains of being emissions compliant, diesel was not. There was no reason for Detroit to do any R&D work and come up with a 4-stroke electronically fuel-injected engine until the government said so. Because up until 1985, Detroit made 2-stroke motors. And very good ones. Okay? It was only when the government started tightening up the emission standards that the 2-stroke could not be made compliant. So Detroit, which happened to be part of General Motors at the time, which also happened to own Hughes Electronics at the time, so they had all the things they needed to make an engine was in-house. And at the time Detroit started making 4-stroke engines, they looked at the electronics on the General Motors products and said, hey, we can do this. So they built an engine from the ground up, 2-stroke overhead cam. They made the first overhead cam diesel engine.